Lecture 5 of the cancer theme. This is our final lecture. A lot of this stuff is not necessarily going to be in the book, so if you look at these study questions, and I hope that you have been following along with those. I notice this every year. The students that are getting A's and B's in the class are doing the reading in the book. So please do follow along. But we're going to kind of fill in some other details based on other sources that we've poured through in order to answer these study questions. Okay, so in real brief review, cancer is a cellular disease. It is a disease of the DNA, disease of mutations. Okay, and we've talked a little bit. This is a cumulative disease, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time for cancer to develop. And so we see here, this person and fictitious person, development of colon cancer. Cancer can arise in any type of cell. Some cells are much less likely to develop cancer than others. We'll talk about that in a bit. But say here, on the left here, this first little diagram shows a cell inside of the colon wall that there's some changes inside of the DNA inside that cell. Perhaps it is related to the diet, amount of alcohol that somebody consumes. Not cancer yet, but it may lead to increased cell division, right? And that's going to lead to this buildup of cells called a tumor. So some type of proto-oncogene that controls the cell cycle in a normal, healthy fashion becomes mutated and becomes an oncogene, which leads to increased cell division. Right? You see that number 1 here. Again, still not cancer. This would be a benign tumor because it's behaving, it's staying put. Okay? But further mutations of that same cell line, right? It's probably not that same cell because that cell might only live for a day or two. But when it divides during the S phase, makes a copy of its DNA, it copies both of those mutations, and the resulting daughter cells may have, in addition to the oncogene being activated, so there's also a tumor suppressor gene that gets mutated in a way that the protein is not being made, and so this is going to increase the rate at which those cells divide. And then it may start to invade nearby tissue, and then at that point it becomes a malignant tumor, right? But it's still not done. There's multiple mutations that happen. We'll talk about staging of tumors in a bit, but suffice to say, there are many mutations that happen in a cancer cell. Okay. And we see, right, these malignant tumors, they don't stay put. So if this colon cancer, if this cancerous tumor arises in the colon, and then it maybe hops into the lymphatic system or into the circulatory system, and one of those cells makes it to the lungs, gets lodged inside of the lungs, and then starts to invade lung tissue and develop tumor in the lung, then suddenly you have colon cancer in your lungs. Okay? Just like you can get liver cancer in your brain. Wherever the tumor first arises, that will be what type of cancer it is. Okay? Wherever it spreads, it's still that original type. So cells become very specialized. They're born as a stem cell that's dedifferentiated, that doesn't really have a specialized job. And then through this process of differentiation, it becomes a very specific type of tissue. And then really what cancer does is it sort of goes backwards. Rather than staying as a colon cell and doing what colon cells do, that cell becomes undifferentiated, unspecialized, and will actually not do its job anymore. So that's one of the reasons that cancer is so detrimental to your body. So yes, you can get liver cancer in your brain, right? Okay, how do we treat cancer? Okay, how is it that we would help to the first thing usually that happens is a biopsy, maybe with a needle biopsy, or maybe they have to actually cut part of the tumor out and check it under the microscope, maybe sequence the genes inside of the DNA of those cells, and then figure out what type of cancer it is, where it first arose, and remove that primary tumor. But if it has spread, then generally there'll be a follow-up with either chemotherapy or radiation. Okay, and so chemotherapy is a whole class of drugs that are used during chemotherapy, and this is rapidly evolving. Probably some of you know folks who have undergone chemo. I know I did. It was the summer of 2002, maybe. Had 4 rounds of chemo. Totally lost all my hair, and I have a lot of hair. Well, not on my head, but I mean all of my hair was gone. My eyebrows, my eyelashes. Really affects your gums. It affects your bone marrow, and which is where your white blood cells that are part of your immune system are produced. So basically, I had effectively no immune system. Your skin becomes a little unhealthy because of what the chemo does. Chemotherapy drugs are chemicals that target rapidly dividing cells. Okay, that includes the cells in your hair follicles that make your hair. That includes the cells that are in your gums, the cells in your skin. Your skin is constantly sloughing off old cells and replacing them through the process of mitosis underneath. And so skin is also attacked by chemotherapy. And, of course, cancer cells are rapidly dividing cells. So chemo targets, above all, what we want them to target is cancer cells, but it also targets these other cell types in your body that can lead to some of those side effects. Radiation is a little bit different in that it is actually a nuclear material. It's some type of element that decays. Its nucleus decays, and as it decays, it emits nuclear energy, and that energy is what actually kills the cancer cells. So if you have a secondary tumor after you've removed the first one, or maybe the tumor is in an inoperable place, so what they can do is beam in photons or beam in little particles of radiation and target very tiny areas and kill that cancer cells. Sometimes what they'll do is plant like a little radiation seed, a little pellet in there, and it will surgically implant near the tumor, and as it emits energy, it breaks down and kills the cancer. Now we're going to talk real briefly about some other more modern type of treatments, because sometimes they say that these chemo and radiation, if the chemo doesn't kill you, then you might survive the cancer. And so there's some very unique new ways of dealing with the same disease. Okay. Okay. Know the general progression of cancer and why you do not develop cancer overnight. Okay, so this is one scheme for staging cancers. If you've not had the unfortunate opportunity to experience this, I mean, I hope you never do, but chances are pretty good you're going to find out somebody you love has cancer, and one of the first things that gets established after they establish it's cancer is what stage it's in. Okay, and you've probably heard this. Uncle Johnny has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Well, that's pretty much all she wrote for Uncle Johnny. Stage 0 is when there is a tumor, so that cell has lost contact inhibition and it is dividing when it shouldn't be dividing, but it's staying put. It's behaving itself. It's a benign tumor. Stage 1, a very small tumor, right? And still, again, is maintaining its original position. I'm not sure exactly what the difference between 0 and 1 is, to tell you the truth, but I guess it's the size of the tumor. Stages 2 and 3, slightly, well, they're different from stages 0 and 1 in that the tumor is now starting to invade nearby tissues. So in the immediate area, so in a breast cancer or a breast tumor, it may, in stage 2, invade nearby fatty tissue. It may invade just immediately outside of the tumor. Stage 3, right, we see the tumors growing in size. So again, one part is depends on the size, but probably more importantly is that in stage 3 the tumor starts to invade maybe the skin. It may invade the nearby lymphatic system, and the lymph system is part of your immune system. It's part of your circulatory system. And what happens is, this blood leaves the heart in an artery, so the aorta, and that aorta splits into smaller and smaller and smaller arteries, and then goes into a capillary bed where the actual exchange happens. Oxygen leaves the blood, goes to the tissue. The tissue then puts carbon dioxide back into the blood, and then the blood goes into the venule system, and then back through larger and larger veins, so it gets to the vena cava and to the heart. So there's this loop, and at the end of the loop, capillaries are tiny little blood vessels that are very porous. So the blood cells can actually move across. These are single-celled, thick layers, and also the plasma from your blood leaves the capillaries, and rather than just being drained into the body proper, it drains into the lymphatic system. Okay, and so your lymph system is found all over your body. You have lymph nodes in your throat, maybe your ankles, your groin, and if you have an infection, they might get swollen because they're also important sites of storing of leukocytes in those white blood cells, right? But they're also usually one of the first places that a tumor is going to spread. So in my case, I had testicular cancer, and the tumor spread from the scrotum into my abdominal cavity to a lymph node that was on sort of the underside of my peritoneal cavity. Underneath all of my intestines and stuff, there's a whole series of lymph nodes, and that is what became cancerous in my case. So, but sort of local spread. Stage 4 is full-blown metastatic cancer. That is, again, where you can get breast cancer, in this case in your skin. We'll see, looks like a dark spot probably on the liver. The liver is a common place for a tumor spread. When I had my follow-ups, I had to get a lot of chest x-rays because the lungs are, because all of your blood and your lymph, well, your blood eventually goes through your lungs, and there's so many little alveoli and things. It's a good place for things to get caught. So from 0 to 4, this may take 20 years. It may take 10 years for an abnormal cell to undergo all of the mutations to become full-blown metastatic cancer at stage 4. Okay, and you also notice at the bottom of this is the key thing about cancer treatment and death rates is we need screening, right? And if you catch a cancer at a stage 1 or stage 2 because you have breast exams every year, then your cure rate, right, and that's survival rate is a 5%, or at 5 years, 87% of people at stage 2 are alive, versus at stage 4, we were talking about 20%. So you can't ignore these things, and you have to have these yearly physicals, pap smears, breast exams, dermatological exams. I've got to watch my head, too much UV up there. So that's talking about why this is, you know, you're not walking down the street and you know, be exposed to some pesticide somebody's spraying and then you have cancer the next day. It's a long walk. There are many things that have to happen before you get full-blown cancer. So here you go, normal cell, far left. You get a mutation on the second chromosome here, and then when that cell divides and makes this third cell here, you see it contains the first mutation, and then maybe a subsequent mutation appears on the third chromosome, and we see this accumulation of mutations. This is also why, if you think about it, and you think about people who have had cancer, it tends to be people who are older. Why? And it's just a matter of time and probability. They've had more time for these mutations to accumulate. And the interesting thing is, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, that there is a snowball effect. It's not a linear, per se, to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 mutations. Right? It may take you 5 years to go from 1 to 2, and then only a year, and then it could just be a few months before we start accumulating 4 and 5 and a number of mutations. Okay, because of the nature of the mutations. Okay, cervical cancer and human papillomavirus. These things are inextricably linked. We stand a chance for one of the first times ever to basically cure a type of cancer, and that is not. I'll talk later about why we can't cure cancer, but we're not actually curing the cancer. We are totally eliminating the possibility of the cause of the cancer. Okay, but this is a very rare thing we're going to see. And there's not many types of cancer that you can find one smoking gun. And pubic warts, human papillomavirus, which very common in college-age kids, and tends not to affect males. They can get penile cancer, but it's more likely they're carriers and then transmit it to a female, and then the virus takes up in the cervix. And we see here on the far left that there's this normal epithelial tissue that covers the lining of the cervix and the uterus, and then HPV that is an intracellular parasite, just like the coronavirus. These little particles, they're not living things, they're particles that get inside of the cell, and they actually will take over this exact system we've been talking about of DNA to RNA, RNA to proteins. Okay, that's exactly what's going on with coronavirus, is that the coronavirus gets into any cell that has an ACE receptor on the outside, gets in there, it injects its DNA. In some cases, its DNA can be incorporated into your genome of the cell, and then when the cell reads that to make an mRNA, the mRNA contains codes for the virus. And so your ribosomes make the constituent parts of the virus, and then the virus erupts out of the cell and kills the cell. But in this process, a lot of times these viruses can get in there and monkey around with these proto-oncogenes, and they can cause cancer. And so we see by stage 1, we see those 3 little black cells, well, gray cells with really dark nuclei, that those may be the first mutation, and then those have a subsequent mutation to have the little pink nuclei. And then in stage 2, that tumor starts to grow. Stage 3, it's basically taking over the full epithelial tissue, and then by stage 4, the cells are leaving the cervix and traveling through the body and finding a new place to form a tumor. Okay, and so yeah, a long process. Now this is very confusing. Okay, so if cancer can be caused by virus, if cancer can be caused by the sun, how can you inherit cancer? Okay, and I'll say that you can't inherit cancer. Humans do not inherit cancer. There are some animals that cancer can be transmitted even sexually, but with humans, you don't inherit cancer, you inherit cells that are more likely to become cancerous. That is, you inherit a propensity to develop certain types of cancer, right? So when your DNA comes, you may have a mutation already, okay? Maybe the tumor suppressor gene has been mutated. And now it gets a little bit more complex because we have two copies. We have a mother copy and a father copy of each of these genes. Every gene has two copies. All of your cells have all the same DNA, and they all have two copies of every gene. So maybe this tumor suppressor, again, codes for a protein. The protein slows cell division. If that DNA becomes mutated, then the ribosome will not make the protein, and therefore the cell divides too quickly. Okay, but if you have two copies, if this one gets damaged, this one can still make the protein usually, and sort of compensate for the damaged oncogene. But if you inherit one mutated and one healthy gene at conception, then you'll only ever have one healthy copy of that oncogene, or proto-oncogene, or one healthy copy of that tumor suppressor gene. And that basically leads you one step closer to cancer. Okay, so I said that's been a kind of theme of this lecture, is that cancer develops in steps, in stages. And so what this inheritance that you can get basically might make you one step closer to cancer. Okay, you don't have the cancer yet, but you have to take fewer risks. It may take you a shorter amount of time, and you may just have less luck in terms of developing cancer. Okay, now you can actually go. You've heard of probably 21andMe, some of these DNA genotyping services that you can send off some cheek cells. They're going to bust those cheek cells open and make copies of your DNA. And they're going to be looking for some of these known faulty genes that can make you more likely to develop cancer. I guess she's probably becoming a little less relevant these days, but Angelina Jolie has always been a very famous actress. And a lot of people don't know, but she basically did just that. She found out that she had a mutation on what's called the BRCA1 gene, BRCA1 gene, and that is a proto-oncogene that, when it's mutated, makes it much more likely that you will develop breast cancer. And interestingly, her response to that information was to have a full mastectomy. So she went and had all of her breast tissue cut off and had fake breast implants put in. And the idea being, of course, if you don't have any breast tissue to mutate, then you'll never develop breast cancer. Right? So again, as we learn more about the genetics of cancer, we can start to maybe put people into a group that rather than getting a colonoscopy every 5 years, you get a colonoscopy every year, so that you can increase the screening process to catch that likelihood of a tumor developing. So a whole bunch of types of cancer, right? And this, I'm not sure what year this was. I usually like to see that. 2014. And this is the American Cancer Society, which is a very well-known and very reputable source on these type of things. So in 2014, and I think this is largely consistent, we see, let me move this out of the way here, some themes or some patterns. Breast cancer is a very common type of cancer. Okay, so we see it's actually the highest number of estimated cases. And in fact, now I don't know about the rates, you can see it's a very high number of cases, but there are other types that kill more people. Okay, so lung cancer is the leading killer in terms of cancerous deaths. Okay, so breast cancer is bad in that many women develop, and men too, but basically women develop breast cancer, and it does cause a lot of deaths. But there are some diseases that are just really killer. So pancreatic cancer comes to mind, right? 46,000 estimated cases. Of those 46,000, basically 40,000 will die. Okay, so pancreatic cancer, very terrible disease. Really a big blow to be diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Other types of cancer, let me see, is testicular on here? Trying to see a type of cancer that's not terrible to get, like skin cancer, right? We'll see 81,000 people are diagnosed, but only 13,000 will die from the disease. So that's becoming a relatively treatable disease. And again, it probably has a lot to do with screening versus pancreatic cancer. You're not going to notice a tumor, and so largely these go until stage 4 or whatever, and then by that point it's just too late. And we see these carcinogens that are specifically target those type of cells. Yeah, there's another one, prostate cancer. If you live long enough, you will very likely get prostate cancer. Okay, but it's a very treatable disease. We see nearly as many men getting prostate cancer as women, and a very low death rate relative to, well, pretty low, right? So cancer isn't cancer. There's all different types of cancer, and all different risk factors involved with developing those type of cancers. So, do a little poking around and learn about these kind of things, right? I think it's good knowledge to have. Let's see. Cancer risk and prevention. A couple of things that you can do to prevent cancer, okay? Everybody has an inherent risk to develop cancer. I'm going to talk about how it's an unavoidable disease. It's sort of a byproduct of our body. But there are things that you can do that really reduce the risk that you will get cancer. And I know for me as a cancer survivor, I have a higher risk of developing cancer than probably most of you guys do. And so some of these things I've really taken to heart. Some really easy things to do, plant fiber. Eating vegetables and fruits is very critical for for preventing, especially things like colon cancer, but also breast cancer and a lot of other types of cancers. Cut down on the animal products, animal fats, dairy, those type of things. I'm not saying become a vegan, but if your goal is to avoid cancer, the research is clear that the fewer animal fats that you ingest, the less likely you are to develop cancer. And then there are some, even in the plant world, there are some type of plants that are actually even better than average at preventing cancer. And those are things like the brassicas, things like cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower. So eat those veggies, right? Especially some. Okay. Big message, I think, for me. I hear this, people saying, that basically there's a probability that they won't ever get cancer, and that they know people that have ate bacon and beef and smoked cigarettes and drank moonshine their whole life, never got cancer, and they see that as basically a reason for them to not be careful. And this will be something you'll we're going to talk about this again later in the semester, and that's about this idea that things are not deterministic in most cases. So, have a cigarette, get lung cancer. It doesn't work like that, right? Have a cigarette, maybe an incremental, tiny little increase in your probability of developing cancer. Smoke a pack of cigarettes a day for a year, you're going to raise your risk a little more, right? And then the more of these risk factors that you engage in or expose yourself to, it basically just increases the risk. I don't think you can probably, well, I was going to say I don't think you can ever get to 100% likelihood of developing cancer, but as I understand it, the people that worked at the Chernobyl site in Ukraine back in the 80s when there was a meltdown of the core, it basically was a 100% chance. If you went into that environment, you were going to develop cancer because that radiation was so intense. If it didn't kill you right there, then it would affect some tissue type in your body, and you would either develop, bone cancer or develop leukemia later in life. But for most of us, it's not a certainty. That is to say, you might not get cancer, right? And I was thinking about this earlier. It's kind of like, well, most of you guys, I think, are probably wanting to get an A in this class, right? Now, coming to class doesn't assure that you're going to get an A, but it makes it more likely that you're going to get an A. Taking notes as you're listening to these lectures, not a guarantee you're going to get an A, right? It's not a deterministic thing. This is not transactional where you do this and then you suddenly get an A. But all of these different things will increase the probability that you're going to get an A. Come to class, take part in conversations, discussions, read your book, answer those study questions, watch these presentations, and take notes as you do so, and then ask me questions when there's questions that you have left over. It's not 100%, but your probability of getting an A goes way up. I've almost never met somebody in this class that didn't do those things and get an A. Okay? Now, some people will hear that and they'll say, well, then screw it. I'm not going to do anything. If that doesn't guarantee me an A, then I'm not even going to bother. Right? But again, I just don't see that as being a very healthy approach to life. Right? You do everything you possibly can to increase the probability of success. Right? You're not guaranteed a job if you wear a suit and tie at your interview, but it increases your likelihood at law, and so most people do, right? So this, again, probabilistic, right? It makes it more likely. You're rolling the dice. It's like a roulette type of situation, okay? Cancer, it is a very interesting and disease. I again have had my own experience with cancer. My mom actually died of cancer when I was young. So it's one of those diseases I know from a fact that I really live in fear of my children developing cancer. And I think part of the reason it's such a scary disease is this idea that the cancer cells actually evolve and change through time. And that as these mutations accumulate, that cancer cell becomes so adept at surviving. Think about what it has to be able to do. It has to be able to evade your immune system. So something about that cell is different, and usually the immune system would pick up on that being a faulty or an errant cell and would just destroy and eliminate that cell. Cancer cells evolve in a way that those cells that can avoid being destroyed by the immune system do better, and therefore they undergo more cell division, and so in the future there's going to be more of those cells than there are cells that can't avoid the immune system. Cancer cells have to be able to rob your body of nutrition, blood, oxygen, those kind of things. So tumors eventually, actually, this process called angiogenesis, tumors actually start to tell your body to reroute those blood vessels to the tumor. And so those tumors that are able to get more nutrition delivered to their doorstep by your circulatory system do better. And so we see basically this selection, right? And so medical researchers have, because they understand this idea of natural selection, this idea that not all cells are the same, and that those cells pass on genetic differences to each other, and that treatments affect some of the cells more than others, and that some cells that are not affected by the treatment those are the cells that stick around, and those are the cells that make a new tumor 5 years down the line. And that new tumor, it may be the same type of cancer, but it has evolved, and it is actually can be resistant to the treatment, right? And so it's more difficult. It's not simply a matter of doing the same thing you did the first time to kill this new tumor, because that new tumor, by nature of it being there, is obviously resistant to that treatment, okay? And so it's quite a scary disease. I'm not going to lie to you. But we are developing, well, not we, but here's a bone tumor. Things can become very aggressive and very fast growing. And at some point, it's just, uncontrollable. Scientists have been coming up with some really fascinating new approaches to dealing with cancer. And this one is very promising. It's basically immunotherapy for cancer. And so the big idea here is it's actually really similar to vaccines, in that they say we all develop some type of cancerous cells, but your immune system will remove those before they mutate to the point where they can avoid being eliminated. And so part of the way that the immune system does this is that we have these T cells, and those are very good at finding viruses, bacteria, and eliminating them. Again, I'm kind of going off on all kind of tangents, but this stuff is very relevant and really important for you to know. Part of the danger of this COVID-19 virus, it is a totally novel virus to many people because it jumped over from what appears to be some type of bat in China. And the human immune system, many people have never encountered a virus like this at all. So that virus has ample time to spread to your body and then replicate using your cells and then cause massive amounts of damage, right? Because versus if you have had some type of exposure to this virus in the past, the first time that virus is encountered, your immune system is activated in a more quick fashion, and it will clear those viruses from your body. So back to cancer, one thing that for specific types of cancers, one type of treatment that's happening is you take the patient, you collect their T cells, then you use a little virus to actually, in a controlled fashion, infect your T cell, and then basically translocate one gene into that T cell's DNA, and then that T cell's DNA makes a protein that gives that, it basically educates that T cell about your specific type of cancer. Right? So now that T cell becomes a really effective killer at finding that specific cancer and clearing it from your system. And so there are some of these very treatment-resistant types of, I believe, skin cancers, especially. They're not responding to chemo and maybe inoperable. And so they have basically taken this person's T cells and programmed them real effectively by adding a gene to them, program them to seek and destroy that type of cancer, and very high cure rates. It's really remarkable that how well this is working. And so that's a new again, it's a novel approach rather than just poisoning somebody and bombarding your body with chemicals and hoping that you kill the more of the cancer cells than the healthy cells, which is basically chemo or radiation. We're now using other mechanisms in the body to kill cancer cells. Okay. So why is it unlikely we're never going to find a cure of cancer? I hear this again and again. People saying, there's a cure out there, but right, Big Pharma doesn't want us to know about it because they want to make money, or doctors don't want you to know about it. I just do not buy it. I mean, I know that there are some issues with our health system, but you guys know a little bit about cancer now, right? You know that cure for cancer, well, what type of cancer are we talking about, right? You've seen the differences in mortality rates depending on what type of cancer it is. We see that some type of cancers are relatively common. Skin cancer is pretty common. Why? Skin mutates more easily because it's exposed to UV. Skin cells divide quickly because they're needed. Brain cancers tend to be relatively rare because brain cells, nerve cells, oftentimes don't divide at all, or they divide very little, and so they're just not as likely to become cancerous. So why can't you find a cure for cancer? Because cancer is really a family of diseases. There's a whole bunch of types of cancers, and each cancer is different. Different types of mutations cause a pancreatic cell to become cancerous than maybe a nerve cell, right? So that's part of it. Another part of it is just simply as long as we have cells, right? So this is kind of the thing. As long as you have cells, and those cells replicate at the instruction of your DNA, that's the cell cycle regulation that we talked about, those proteins, the growth factors. As long as that system is in place, and as long as the DNA that instructs the cells to divide can mutate, then we're going to have cancer. Okay? You can't get rid of cancer because it's basically a hijacking of a necessary mechanism, a necessary part of your body. Okay? You can't get rid of cells. Obviously, then you get rid of your body. You get rid of yourself. You can't have them not divide because we need to grow and we need to repair. So we need that cell division. That needs to be regulated, right? And that's regulated by DNA and indirectly. And the DNA is always going to be able to be mutated by, even if everybody stops smoking cigarettes, right? You can still, and everybody, you need UV, so you can't avoid UV. People are probably always going to eat animal products, and that will lead to, so you can never do away with mutation. It's just not plausible to think that there is a cure for cancer, right? So I'm hoping you'll be able to address those people when this misconception comes into a conversation at some point. Okay, well that is the cancer theme. I hope you learned something. I hope that this makes you more able to deal with a really difficult situation in the past. And I appreciate your attention, and we'll see you again soon.